How y'all doing? This is Mongo Slade, and today we're going to talk about scripted promos. But first, hit that like button for me, and then hit subscribe to make sure you're still subscribed. Thank you kindly. So this is from Ringside News. It says top WWE superstars prefer scripted promos instead of improvising them. Okay, so it says this is the story. WWE superstars must memorize lines in a hurry, and the company's general edict is that they must stick to the script. Some top WWE superstars make it seem effortless to the point where some think they are improvising, but that is not the case. Many fans give the WWE product grief because of the scripted nature of the programming. Some top WWE superstars actually prefer working with a script. Ringside News has been told that Miz, while his lines seem off the cuffs, loves being scripted. His delivery is that good because of the caliber of entertainer he is and the lines which are written for him. The Miz isn't the only one who doesn't really like to improvise. A tenured member of the creative team told us that Bayley and Sasha Banks don't really improvise, but have a lot of input in their segments, quote unquote. We previously reported that the Street Profits work incredibly close with their writer. They do get more of an opportunity to improvise, which is what something Paul Heyman fought for. It was told us that the Street Profits don't improvise as much as one might think. So so we got Bayley, Sasha Banks, The Miz, and the Street Profits. They all prefer scripted promos. So here's the thing. Uh, Most people the scripts they absolutely cannot be as limiting as people make them out to be. Also, it should not be a surprise that people like scripted promos because it actually cuts down on a lot of the work. I'll get to that in a moment. But also understand that one of the first people I ever heard having scripted promos was The Rock. And I remember Undertaker actually broke kayfabe and said this on TV, that The Rock with his army of writers is what come up with all of his jokes and all that type of stuff, right? And that was around the time that was the Attitude Era. What was that? When Undertaker, like 99 maybe? 99, 2000? Because Undertaker was a heel. I think it might have been, I don't know if it was the Ministry of Darkness Undertaker or if it was Big Evil. I'm not entirely, but if it was Big Evil, it would have been about 2002. So it had to be about 99 where Undertaker made this comment. It was on TV about The Rock and his army of writers. But that sort of began the whole ordeal that, people scripting promos. Now, there have been people who have said that there was scripting in the 80s. I forget. I'm trying to remember somebody who said that there were scripts in the 80s. But somebody was it? As I say this, I'm thinking of Greg Valentine saying it, but I don't feel like Greg Valentine said it. But of course, you know that Pritchard and Vince, they used to give people a lot of direction, and that's really what scripting is giving people direction. Or people think it's literally writing down word for word what they're going to say, which is basically just acting. Yeah, there's some of that too, definitely teleprompters and everything people have been talking about. But I think also part of the whole scripting is but the alternate of that is excessive pre-recording, which you have. Did I say what? I said something wrong there. But anyway, the counterpoint, let's say, is excessive pre-recording, because that's really what they've been doing. Like, when they do pre-tapes, you sit there and you go over and over and over and over and over and over again, and until you get your promo the way that you want it. But those promos are actually shorter than the promos now. Promos now are way too long. But it makes sense that I heard about there being some scripting in the 80s. It makes sense because Hogan had been in the movies, and he was actually doing movies. He was doing he was a big movie star in the 80s and 90s. I wouldn't say big as in he's like Stallone or Schwarzenegger, but he was big as in he was consistently in movies in the 80s and early 90s. So it would make sense for there to be some scripting around that time, as Hogan tries to flex his acting chops. And then they were also doing very dramatic storylines like, the Miss Elizabeth stuff with Randy Savage. All that stuff had to be pretty much prearranged. It had to be. In order to get a lot of the responses that people want out of these segments, they have to be prearranged. People are like, well, we got to improvise. It's like, well, you don't improvise as much as you think. Like, you have to stay on task to a degree. But Kurt Angle has said that he prefers being scripted because he doesn't really know what to say. And it gives you a general direction for the story. Even if you go off the script, at least you have a general direction of where to go. But some people prefer scripting because you don't have to worry about what to say. You know, other people are going to come up and tell you, okay, this is what we need. You get directly what the character needs to say or what the character needs to convey. You get it directly from the people who are coming up with the story, which makes sense, you know, because I mean, it's one thing to say, well, I'm going to go out there and cut this promo, but what we end up seeing usually is it being somewhat disjointed. When there is nobody there to guide the program, to guide it, there's people who smother it. Like, you can smother the shit, but then there's people who are, I mean, let's take a look at some of the independents. You know, like sometimes you see independent promos and they veer off into other things, or they end up repeating themselves over and over and over again because the guy has more time than he has things to say. And WWE does that too sometimes. Like, they'll give a guy 3 or 4 minutes for a promo and he'll go over the same things 2 or 3 times. It's like, okay, we got it the first time. You know, for instance, Jonathan Gresham in Ring of Honor. I can tell his promos aren't scripted. They're prearranged, definitely. He probably redid them over and over again. But he kind of says the same thing over and over again. Like, he doesn't really have that much to say. But again, WWE scripting is not much different, because sometimes you'll have guys cutting essentially the same promo 100 times. Charlotte does it a lot. She'll cut the same promo again and again and again. But there is some benefits to scripting. Like I said, it does take people, you know, who just want to show up and do the job. You know, they just they don't want to sit down and have to come up with witty lines and all that type of stuff. They can just come in, get handed a sheet of paper. Hey, here, this is what we want you to say. You don't need to memorize every bit of it, because it's impossible to do so. Nobody does that. Nobody does exactly word for word what's written. Even actors don't do that, because you have to perform the schedule. You have to perform the thing in your own way without it feeling constricting, or without it feeling stilted. Like, that's really what a bad actor is going to, you know, go out there and say exactly. You know, like when Jack Swagger used to cut promos. He used to go out there and be very deliberate in what he's saying, because he's reading it from a card, you know. And it's like, it's also, can tell, like, they was trying to work on his speech and all that type of stuff. You know, that type of stuff is pretty obvious. Like, it's pretty obvious when the promos are stilted and bad. But it's also pretty obvious when there's no clear direction and they're all over the place and they're bad, you know. And at least with a scripted promo, you had a guidepost, and you weren't just told to go out there and do something. Because as we see with AEW, you know, sometimes no scripts work, you know, because you have a very few people who can go out there off the cuff and really do good. The gift of gab is not that it's not that prominent in the world. You know, very few people have that firepower, you know, that can go out there, be witty, be funny, and all that type of stuff. Very few people can do that. As you can see, most people, as they're talking, you know, they're thinking as they're talking, and they're going to flub, they're going to stutter, they're going to say horrible things. And this is how you know, like, when something is really good, it's been obviously practiced over and over and over again, which is basically the same as scripting it. Okay, for people who think that there's no real difference, there is a difference. There is no real difference between the two. If you practice something again and again and again and again and again and again, like Jericho does, like Jericho says, "Oh, I don't get handed a script." It's like, yeah, but Jericho's segments are obviously so produced and choreographed that he's probably been working on it all afternoon. You know, so he knows exactly what he's going to say, not because somebody wrote a script, but because he's been practicing it. He's not going out there and improvising. You know, that's not happening. You know, because that would be unprofessional. That would be crazy. You know, like, you're on live TV, and then your opponent needs to know what you're saying, because they can respond to what you're saying. It's just like when people say, "Wait, we go out there and we call it on the fly," as far as the matches are concerned. It's like, yeah, you call it on the fly, but you still have the finish is prearranged, right? So that's where you're going with you know what the finish is before you go out there. You're not going to go out there and then make up the finish. You know what the finish is. You know 2 or 3 spots that might be necessary to get to the finish, but you may make up things in the middle of it. That's kind of what, the general idea of cutting promos should be, is that you have this central idea that we need you to stick to. And some people need to be held to that central idea a lot tighter than other people. And then you may have meander along the way to get there, but you're on a time constraint because you're on TV. So you don't have a lot of time to fool around and fuck around and with the crowd and all that type of stuff. Like some people don't have that ability, and we need to just accept and understand that certain people don't want that ability. Some people just don't want to go out there and do that. Like some people, I saw, and this was really crazy, and I've never heard this before until he said it. But TJP claims that they were scripting the matches, that WWE was telling him what to do in matches, and that they were telling the referees to tell him what to do, like to grab a hold or something like that. And the best way I could think of that is, now for starters, he's the only one I've ever heard say that. I've never heard anyone else say that WWE was giving them match advice during the match. Second, that probably would come from the agents, and it probably has something to do with they're about to go to commercial, so he should probably just grab a hold because they're about to go to commercial or something like that. He did leave the context wide open, but he said, "Oh yeah, they tell you what you do from everything from the entrance to the end of the match, blah 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 blah," and that might be true. But ultimately, he's the only one I've ever heard say that. If we're being honest, Rich Swann never said that, and I'm pretty sure Rich Swann has wrestled TJP 100 times. The issue is some people need guidance more than other people do. That's the central idea of this video. Is some people need guidance, other people don't. Now, more people need guidance than they think they do. That's another thing. A lot of people be like, "Oh, I don't need any help. I'll go out there and do my own thing." It's like there's a reason why, when you watch old ECW, old WCW, some guys never talked. They went out there and just never said anything. And there's a reason for it. Because they weren't good. And so they covered it up by just having guys either not talk, which means is really, really, it's going to hinder your ability to get over. Because people need to connect with you, not only through being able to see you, but also being able to hear you and know what your mission is and what your plans are and what your attitude is and what your mood is and stuff like that. And all that type of stuff. So that's one thing. ECW was another one where guys would be, ECW was the masters of doing pre-tape, because that's how old wrestling used to be done. You sit around and do your pre-tapes, and then you just fold those into the show later on. But cutting live promos is very different than cutting tape promos too. Like I just said about the pre-tape, those are very different from live promos. People get nervous in front of large crowds. People get nervous in live shows. If I had to do one of the things I had to do in college is when you have to do speeches. Like speech was mandatory in college, and you would see people up there shaking in front of their PowerPoint. They would be so nervous, and it's just you standing and talking, but you have to project confidence. You have to project that you know what you're talking about, and you have to look at people as they're looking at you, right? To gauge their response. So imagine you're doing that, but it's not it's not 20 to 30 people in a room. There's 30,000 people in the room, 1,500 people in the room, waiting to chant. If you screw up, if you stutter, if you forget what you're going to say, it's going to be on national TV. Everybody's going to laugh at you because that's what happens when you stutter. Like people have been laughing at Joe Biden all the time because he's got this cognitive dysfunction and he says things that he probably shouldn't say and shoving it out under pressure or whatever the hell. And then people have just started laughing at it and making fun of him because he said it in front of millions of people. Yes, that happens. That could be your legacy is stuttering in front of people as you were told to go out there and cut this promo. Some people don't have that ability. They never had to do it before, which is why WWE forces people to do promo class. That's because it's a forced speech class. So you go and stand in front of people and talk. And if you look at some of the speech classes, like they show clips of the Sasha Banks and Bayley speech classes during their, I think it was the Untold video, you could hear how shaky their voices were. You could look at their hands and tell that they've never done stuff like that before. You have to do it in repetition to get over it. And you can't just take a guy and say, okay, well, we're not going to give you any sort of training or anything. We're just going to put you out there in front of 10,000 people and let you talk. He's going to freeze up. So at least scripting the promo, he at least knows, okay, this is where I'm going with this. If I get worried, if I get upset, I still have a guidepost to keep me going down the road. You know, some people just freeze up, man. They just not good at at promos, and promos are hard. You know, promos are hard. As somebody who talks, you know, because I talk on here, you know, it's not easy coming up with witty lines or trying to be funny and stuff like that. And people just think like, okay, well, you could be dry, you could be monotone, you could be boring, you could be all those type of things because the voice is doing all the work. And if people are looking at you, they're looking at you fidget. You know, they're looking at you and seeing what you're doing with your hands. They're listening to your inflection. They're listening to everything that you do. You know, so I mean that's just kind of how it is, man. And I understand why some people prefer to be scripted because it makes you, and it does help. It helps tremendously. You know, certain people can come up with fun things like Steve Austin when he talked about not wanting to really do scripted stuff. Steve Austin also leaned very heavily on stuff that he was doing in the back. You know, and people do that stuff all the time too. You know, like the whole what he was doing that stuff already before he even brought it to TV. It wasn't like he came up with it on the fly. He was already doing that stuff. It was something they were doing in the back that he brought to the front. You know, brought to TV. You know, and The Rock was the same thing. Like he was talking about the jabroni when he said this in the Iron Sheik documentary that, you know, the jabroni was something he grew up hearing because Iron Sheik called everybody a jabroni. So he basically just took that and brought it to the front. You know, like a lot, that's what a lot of things are. Like when people say crazy things sometimes, either they sat down and they thought about it and then wrote it down and then tried to place it into an improvised statement. Or they really rehearse and pre-rehearse these things. And it depends on what you're doing. You know, if you're doing a collegiate academic presentation, you probably should write a script. You know, like if I was like when I do these loosely based political videos, I have more of a guidepost than I do when I do videos like this. Like I'm just doing a conversational thing now. I don't sit down and think too heavily about what I'm going to say because for starters, I have a clear message because I'm working off of an article, you know, so it's basically kind of scripted because I have a general idea pointed right in my face. But when I do other things, I just have to come up with a general idea and then stick to it. And then sometimes I do fun meanderings or whatever, and I have to redo it because I have talked and gone way over and not paid attention to what the hell I was saying and got back on point. And that's what you have to worry about. So if you're doing something academic, you probably do need to have a script, have bullet points, have whatever it takes, you know, to get your stuff together. But I find it very strange that people who script, like especially their YouTube videos and stuff like that, are upset that WWE scripts promos. It's like, you understand why they script promos because you script your YouTube channel. Like your YouTube channel is scripted, you know, heavily edited. So it's like, yeah, just like in the old days, those promos were heavily edited and they were probably either scripted or pre-rehearsed again and again and again and again to the point where they were already basically scripted because they're bits and pieces of outtakes that you've already done. All right, so that's it, man. Thanks you guys for listening. Like this video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will talk to you guys later.